talk a bit about a couple of topics that I find interesting in Bitcoin today, and I want to make this interactive. Since I'm here, you can interrupt me as much as you want. We'll do some Q&A while I'm talking and keep it interactive. So the first topic I want to talk about is Bitcoin neutrality. And together with that, I want to talk about resetting our expectations as to the trajectory of Bitcoin. So first of all, Bitcoin neutrality, what does that mean? My theory is that the most important characteristics, the greatest features of Bitcoin, come from the fact that at the fundamental level, it is a protocol that is neutral. Neutral to sender, neutral to recipient, neutral as to the content of a transaction. We've had a network like that before. It's IP, and it worked pretty well because it was neutral. The dump pipe approach of the internet allowed us to do innovation at the edges. Innovation without permission, and innovation without changing the underlying protocol. So that's already happening on Bitcoin. And if you think about it carefully, all of the interesting things that Bitcoin is able to do actually derive from this core principle of neutrality.
Yeah, it is.
If you look at Bitcoin not as a coin, but as a protocol, as a network, as an open standard, the core blockchain technology is a bit like the internet protocol. It is a base address-to-address system. Essentially, it's a layer 3 protocol. And on top of that, we're already building applications. Currency is only the first application that we're building on top of the Bitcoin protocol. If you've studied some of the things that are coming along like Mastercoin, you'll find that they're doing some rather interesting things with the protocol to elevate these a couple of layers up. So if blockchain is IP, then within each transaction, the script that's used inside the transaction is the transport control protocol, it's TCP. The transactions allow you to specify the content of the transaction as it's stored on the blockchain. And with a couple of neat tricks, Mastercoin, by assigning special addresses, is able to take it one layer above, kind of like port 80 or HTTP, creating another layer of protocols above the basic capability of Bitcoin. Why does all this matter? It matters because Bitcoin is not a coin, and Bitcoin is not a currency. And we're going to spend the next 10 years fixing the basic mistake of naming it Bitcoin. Because all of the words are wrong. We don't have wallets. We don't really use keys, not in the way we consider them in terms of cryptography. And there are no coins. So it's a very poorly named system. I would have preferred if we called it MoneyNet. That would have been the intra-MoneyNet. That would be more accurate because already we have, as new people come into this currency, we have to explain to them why Bitcoin is so much more important than just a coin because it's not a coin. And we haven't even started, so that's a lot of explaining to do. So Bitcoin neutrality is extremely important because all of the capabilities that are built on top of Bitcoin depend on the protocol being completely neutral to sender and recipient. Robert G. Brown, an IBM analyst, coined a nice little phrase, which is, on the blockchain, nobody knows your fridge. And this is a really important insight because just like the internet, it speaks to the ability to innovate without permission. It speaks to a fundamental separation of identity and asset ownership. And on top of that, we can build a lot. Because that core principle allows us to have a flexible network that provides a layer that is transparent to the layers above, and on top of which we can build a lot more than just once. So Bitcoin is the first app. Currency is the first app on the Bitcoin network. We have barely started. When I read about Bitcoin in the popular press, a common metaphor is that Bitcoin is like the internet in 1995. And I was on the internet in 1989, and I can tell you Bitcoin is not like the internet in 95. Bitcoin is like the internet in 1991. We don't have a killer app yet. We don't have DNS yet. We don't have web yet. We're going around with lists of IP addresses in our wallet and using Archie, Gopher, and Usenet as the killer applications. That's what we are in terms of Bitcoin. We're still in the obscure, geeky, awkward phase. And that's fine, because that means we have a lot of work to do before we can show this to consumers. There's a really interesting video going around showing a Morning in America, I think, discussion about the internet in 1994. And you have these three bewildered editors spending about 15 minutes trying to decide whether the @ sign is pronounced at or about, if it's an email or the internet, and what the hell this .com thing at the end is. And this is in 1994. So relax, we've got plenty of time. This thing isn't going mainstream until we fix a few basic problems. But here are the lessons we can learn from the internet and apply them to Bitcoin. And the first thing is that this neutrality that's built into the core protocol will be attacked. And it will be attacked almost immediately by everyone building things on the layer above who wants to apply control. The internet started as an NE20 network. It's not that much of an NE20 network today. Unfortunately, the core principle of neutrality has been massively diluted, and we are at risk of losing it. And I want to caution you all because the exact same thing is going to happen to Bitcoin. So what does it mean for Bitcoin to not be neutral? For Bitcoin to not be neutral, it means that suddenly the protocol starts caring about who the sender is, or who the destination is, or what the content of their transaction is. And if we allow that process to start, it's going to ruin Bitcoin for all of us. So pay attention. Pay attention to the critical signs. Most important thing to notice is that when they come to take away your Bitcoin neutrality, they're not going to phrase it in terms of breaking Bitcoin. They're going to phrase it in terms of fixing Bitcoin, making it harder to steal Bitcoin, making it easier to reverse theft of Bitcoin, making it easier to stop criminals from using Bitcoin by using filtering on addresses. Resist. We cannot allow them to break Bitcoin neutrality, because if they break Bitcoin neutrality, the system, the network, the currency devolves into being just another fiat. And I don't want that to happen because Bitcoin is just not another fiat. Bitcoin isn't the 193rd currency in the world. Bitcoin is the first supranational currency, and we've never done that before. So the second part of my talk, if you understand the importance of neutrality and understand why we should keep neutrality, is to adjust your expectations. I think we have some expectations of Bitcoin that need to be adjusted, and adjusted in a more aggressive manner. So in the last few weeks, something remarkable happened. BTC China went from a low percentage of the total volume to doing somewhere between 80 and 90,000 Bitcoin a day, which put it at about 50 to 55% of global volume. That is hugely significant. Basically, the geographic center of Bitcoin just shifted 15,000 miles to the east and landed somewhere in the middle of Southeast Asia, which also happens to be the place where 3.5 billion people live, in that one corner, right? And so the reason I'm saying you should reset your expectations is because we've built Bitcoin as a fad. We've built it and we've developed it most here in Silicon Valley, where there is no social or political problem that we don't think we can solve with technology. An assumption that is full of hubris and audacity, but also necessary for innovation, so it kind of works. But it's no longer about us. It's no longer about white, male, English-speaking users of Bitcoin. As of 4 weeks ago, the average Bitcoin user shifted to being a 20-year-old Han-Chinese man. And that's a great thing. Right? That's a really important step in the development of this currency. So if you look at Bitcoin and you think, well, this is going to play out over the next 10 to 15 years, reset your expectations. Bitcoin is going to play out over the next 3 years. It will either die in those 3 years, or it will survive. And if it survives, it will explode across the globe. It will explode across the globe in these little explosions of adoption that will happen in different countries as people see the relative utility of a supranational currency completely beats their own. And it will happen here last. Why? Because because we got it good. We have the only world reserve currency. And that's a really great thing to have. But there are 191 other places that don't have the world reserve currency. And whether their currency sucks, as it does in so many countries, whether their government sucks or their political system sucks and they see Bitcoin as a possible solution, or whether they recognize that perhaps a world reserve currency that's controlled by math and not people is a better proposition. Either way, we're going to start seeing movements of national adoption. China was the first. What's really significant about understanding China is that this was not an accident. This was not a coincidence. If you've been paying attention over the last 4 months, there have been 4 documentaries on Chinese TV talking about Bitcoin. So, if you think about it from our perspective, you think, great, they went out, they saw a good story, someone called their editor, said, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin. And that went up the chain until someone on the Chinese TV said, that sounds like a good topic, let's put it on the air. That's not how things happen in China. It pretty much went exactly the opposite way. Someone at the top of the political system said, well, there's one world reserve currency and it belongs to our greatest competitor. And there's this other thing that's based on math. And we could use it to poke them in the eye. Start playing documentaries, please. And that's what happened. If you get a documentary on Chinese TV, it is not despite the leadership. It is because and entirely endorsed by the leadership. This is a political move, and it is a very important political move because it means that China is now beginning to bet that Bitcoin will have less of a disruptive influence within China and more of a disruptive influence to the global reserve currency status of the US dollar. There are 191 other countries that might make the same calculation. And guess what? They all have the same game theory in mind, which says if we have one currency that's controlled by people and one supranational currency that's not controlled by anyone, the supranational one is better. Yes?
So if you follow your narrative,
Yes.
that would say that the government of the United States is going to do everything in its power to destroy Bitcoin because it's a national security issue given our balance of debt.
Will the United States government do everything in its power to destroy Bitcoin? At first, yes. So we're in an interesting situation right now, which is the ones who understand what's going on are terrified, and the ones who are not yet terrified don't quite understand what's going on, but will soon be terrified. Because if you are the type of bank or government that funds your entire existence through war, and debt issuance, and fraud, and rent-seeking, and controlling the flows of money, then the currency that you can't control is anathema. So absolutely, this is becoming a very serious strategic game now. But it doesn't matter. Cat's out of the bag. Bitcoin is unstoppable. Externalities cannot stop Bitcoin. Right now, the only scenario that could result in Bitcoin failure would be a long-running bug that reveals keys in a way we don't notice, and don't notice for a long time. That could destroy Bitcoin. Take the Android secure random implementation that revealed a few dozen keys because it used improper initialization of a random number generator. If that had gone on for a year unnoticed and compromised 60–70% of the keys on the blockchain, that would kill Bitcoin. That can kill Bitcoin. Absent of that, however, there are very few forces that can stop a currency that has now gone global. So, just at the same time that the American government perhaps does become worried about this, it's too late because China happened. Yes.